when I was in Australia, Srila Prabhupada was not very available to most of the devotees. But when I went to Bombay in the beginning of 1974, Prabhupada passed through many, many times. Whenever he was going around the world, he'd come through Bombay to see how the construction was going, and there were so many problems associated with Bombay. So the mood of Srila Prabhupada in Bombay, in India, was very different from when he was in Australia. Even his cloth, he would just wear the loose top and be very relaxed. And devotees could freely access Srila Prabhupada. And every night that Prabhupada was in Bombay, he would have a darshan on his roof. And Prabhupada would go up there, and sometimes he'd go up and there'd be nobody there, just a servant with Prabhupada or someone fanning Prabhupada, or sometimes he'd be sitting alone. And so he'd be chanting, so you could sit and chant with Prabhupada, and any questions you could ask. And then slowly, slowly guests would come, Indian guests and devotees, and it would become quite packed. So that was every day. Prabhupada had, this more, there was more freedom with Srila Prabhupada there. And he had many film stars come, big industrialists, many people would come. And he was always so warm and welcoming, and they would come and sit right up the front. He'd bring them up the front, and then he would start preaching to them straight away. And I remember once there was this old man that used to come, and he just lived down the road on the way in between the temple and the beach, and he had some disease where he used to shake. His fingers, his hands and head used to shake all the time. So he used to come and he used to visit Srila Prabhupada, and he didn't do much, he would just go up to Prabhupada's room and sort of sit there and say a few pleasantries and sort of sit and shake there. He'd talk sometimes to Srila Prabhupada, but his servant, I don't know who he was at the time, stopped him coming because he thought, he's just wasting Prabhupada's time. And so the old man thought, I shouldn't go. He was really humble. And so he didn't go anymore to see Prabhupada. And then one day, after a long time, there were many devotees there, he came in and he offered obeisances. He was very old. And Prabhupada said, where have you been? Why haven't you been coming? And he said, Prabhupada, they told me not to come. And Prabhupada said, you can come at any time. And he chastised the servants, and said, let him come at any time. So I thought that was really wonderful of Srila Prabhupada, because his work was so important, his translating work, and there was no immediate benefit that you could see from this old gentleman coming in front of Prabhupada and sitting, taking his time, but Srila Prabhupada was so free, there with his time. Anybody who wanted could go see Prabhupada. And when we cleaned his quarters, we would always change his sheets, and Prabhupada stopped that. He said, you don't change them every day, you just change when they're dirty. And because they were never dirty, but Prabhupada wanted that. And another thing, he used to have a garland, his fresh garland. He had a picture of Radha and Krishna on his little table. And after he'd come back from his morning class and everything, he'd take off that garland and put it on a picture of Radha and Krishna on his desk. But we weren't allowed to throw it out. And on the wall there was the disciplic succession, Bhaktisiddhanta, Gaurakishore and Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So after the garland had been on the deity picture, we would take it off so that he could put the fresh one on, and then we'd place it on Bhaktisiddhanta's picture, and then the next day we'd move it down to Gaurakishore's picture. We'd be moving them all along, and then down to Bhaktivinoda Thakur's picture, and finally we could take it as prasadam. So Prabhupada was very particular about things like that. So one day I had this Bhaktivinoda Thakur's garland on, which you can imagine in the Bombay sun was quite shriveled, So that day I started to think, Prabhupada doesn't really know me, and he knows so many devotees so well, and he hardly knows me, and I was feeling a little bad that I don't get to do very much for Srila Prabhupada, and I was making his vases, which I did every day, and I used to take them up at 11 o'clock. At that time Prabhupada was always having his massage. So that day, the very day I'd been thinking that, I went upstairs and Prabhupada was in his room. So I stopped in fear, in awe, and then I walked in, I put the vases down and offered obeisances, and I was flustered and I was trying to back out of the room. And Prabhupada he looked at that old garland and he said, "Where from you got this garland?" And he said, "Here, you take this one." And he reached down and he took the fresh garland from that morning that he just put over the picture of the deities, and he gave it to me. Oh, so I felt so happy, and I realized that Prabhupada, he knows what we need. He knows exactly what we need in spiritual life, and it was just so much encouragement from Srila Prabhupada. Then I felt also foolish that I'd had to think like that, and that Prabhupada had to cater to me. But still, it was very treasured for me, that had happened. I asked Prabhupada a couple of instructions. Oh, actually, Prabhupada told me I used to dress Radha Rasa Bihari, and I had put a red Ramanuja type tilak thing inside Krishna's tilak. And Prabhupada sent a message, you never to put anything in Krishna's tilak like that. Krishna's tilak should always be clear. And then another time I asked him about the spices because he'd restricted spicing. And I asked him, well, can't we even use mustard seeds? He said, look, it's just cumin seed and hing. It's sufficient actually for the deities. And I asked him about Radharani's hair because there was some contention at the time in Bombay that Radharani's hair shouldn't be showing. It shouldn't be out. It should be tied back because she's the most chaste lady. But we often used to put her hair out. And so I asked Srila Prabhupada, can Radharani's hair be out or does it have to be tied back? And he said, whatever you think looks nice. So he wasn't strict on that. And one other time it was Govardhan Puja, and Vishalini came. And she learnt all the lines for Krishna, and she dressed herself up in a dhoti, and she put blue, and she learnt the lines so nicely, and she spoke it all so enthusiastically that after the play, Srila Prabhupada got up off his Vyasasana and he walked around to her, and he took his garland off and put his garland on Vishalini, and he folded his hands like that and bent down and did pranams to Vishalini. So he really appreciated what she had done.